Kings, presidents and progressive partners. From the UN to the UK, the Prime Minister has been navigating a rapidly shifting global landscape. And as the trip nears an end, Anthony Albanese joins us today, live from London. I'm David Speers. Welcome to Insiders. We're live from the BBC studios in London, where it's midnight and our terrific panel is here, ready to analyse what's been a huge week for the Prime Minister. He's just back from meeting the King at Balmoral, and I sat down with Anthony Albanese while we were up in Scotland. We'll bring that to you in a moment. Here in London, like-minded progressive leaders met to discuss the rise of anti-immigration populists on the right and how to counter them. It's delicate though. They're all trying to keep Donald Trump on side, a leader who says migration is sending Western democracies to hell and calls climate change a con. The Prime Minister now has a White House meeting locked in after a productive few days at the UN, which also included recognising Palestinian statehood.
Ready to go?
Good to go.
Australia has now officially recognised Palestine as a state,
signalling a major shift in foreign policy.
Enough is enough.
Part of a coordinated push.
The United Kingdom, Canada and also France.
To keep alive the possibility of peace.
Le temps est venu.
Leaders finding strength in numbers as they defy the Trump administration.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci. Frankly, he believes it's a reward to Hamas.
Hamas will have no role in governing.
Susan Lee took the unusual step of writing to United States Republicans.
This is not a bipartisan position held in Australia.
Saying a coalition government would reverse Australia's move to recognise Palestine.
The opposition of Australia running a rogue foreign policy is not in the nation's interests.
Anthony Albanese has finally had his first face-to-face encounter with Donald Trump.
When Anthony met Donald.
The leaders spoke briefly today at a reception.
Just hours after the president left world leaders stunned.
What is the purpose of the United Nations?
This was an absolute rip snorter.
Your countries are going to hell.
A punishing presidential pounding.
And he also was really focused on climate change.
It's the greatest con job ever perpetrated on the world.
We are honouring our commitment to the Paris Agreement.
This, of course, in stark contrast to what we heard from Donald Trump.
If the United Nations steps back, we all lose ground.
Two things I got from the United Nations, a bad escalator and a bad teleprompter.
He's entitled to give that speech.
The White House has confirmed they'd finally hold formal talks next month.
As I foreshadowed, if people listen to what we say, a meeting in Washington DC on October 20th.
Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has touched down in London.
For talks with his British counterpart Keir Starmer.
It's a real privilege and pleasure to have you here.
The AUKUS deal, climate change and the wars in Ukraine and Gaza are set to dominate the talks.
It's been a very busy day here in London. My job is to advocate for Australia, and that's what I do.
Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has had an audience with King Charles at Balmoral Castle in Scotland.
How you going? We're polite guests.
We'll hear from the Prime Minister coming up. First, let's check what's making news. Anthony Albanese met King Charles at Balmoral Castle today, where they discussed global uncertainty and events in Australia. The Prime Minister was joined by his partner Jodie Hayden for lunch at the castle before a visit to a local church regularly attended by the King, as well as his late mother, Queen Elizabeth II. After the meeting of progressive leaders here in London yesterday, the British Prime Minister is today promising to build 12 new towns across England to address the local housing crisis. It's part of Sir Keir Starmer's push back at the pressure he's facing from the right-wing Reform Party on the issue of migration. And finally, Susan Lee is heading to Western Australia after her WA frontbencher Andrew Hastie spent much of the past week charting different policy positions on migration and net zero. There's no word on whether the pair will appear together. Well, selfies, summits and sit-down meetings, a lot has been packed in over the past week. Australia's bid for a seat on the UN Security Council has also been revived. In this Trump era, nothing is certain, and China is filling vacuums created by the US on trade, climate action and aid. It's a difficult landscape to navigate, and Anthony Albanese is aligning Australia more closely with like-minded middle powers. Let's see what the panel makes of it. And a very good evening, Phil Coorey, Anna Henderson and David Crowe. Thank you for staying up tonight for our audience, really appreciate it. And particularly, David, having you back on the show.
Well, good morning, it's great to be back.
You've been based here in London for a while now. We've had to drag the show to London just to get you back on. It's not the couch though, it's the BBC desk, but it's great to be here. Look, Phil, it has been a really busy week at the UN, at the UK, here in the UK, all these meetings. When you look at the difficult terrain that the Prime Minister is trying to navigate at the moment, how's he gone?
Look, pretty well. I mean, the interesting thing from coming on this trip, David, is the perspective you get that what's going on in Australia is by no means isolated. We'll talk a lot about immigration. Clearly what's going on here in the UK and until recently in the US is a lot worse and different to what we have in Australia, but there's an effort in Australia to import that. So there is there's a similarity there. So as you said in your opening remarks, the big subplot last week or this week, wherever we are, at the UN was really Australia, and they've been building up to this before we left, just aligning itself with the Canadians, the French, the British,
which is inspired by Trump?
Yeah, it's a product of it. I mean, what they're trying to set is this alternative narrative of what we say like-minded progressive leaders, middle power, although you probably wouldn't call the French middle power or the British, but that sort of thing, basically just to sort of run the line on democracy and a progressive line on climate change. They worked in concert in the UN on Palestine. The view is that if Australia acts alone on these things, no one's going to notice. But the more countries you do, you can just sort of act as a foil, if you like, to the madness, or want of a better term, that's coming from other parts of the world.
Speaking of Donald Trump, Anna, the meeting's now been locked in for the Prime Minister. It's been locked in. We can stop asking when and whether it's going to happen. We can start asking what needs to be achieved on October 20 when Anthony Albanese goes there. We know from seeing other leaders that it's not an easy environment sitting in that Oval Office all the time. What do you think he needs to aim for?
Well, it does come with risk, doesn't it, to go to the White House, to have that sit down. You're in a power imbalance with the president, and he can be quite unpredictable in how he reacts and deals with international leaders. So he does say that the Prime Minister is a good friend. He's often underscoring what he says is, the positive vibes he gives out about the PM. But when they're in that room, I mean, the AUKUS deal and its future has to be central to whatever is discussed. And, the idea that this is not locked in, that the review's happening, it's undecided. The Prime Minister is saying, on a daily basis that he has been assured that this is going to happen. It's progressing. We're paying the money over.
They're sounding very confident on this, aren't they? Every time they're asked, privately and publicly.
Yeah,
there's a lot of confidence.
They're getting those assurances behind the scenes, that's for sure.
And yet you never hear Donald Trump say anything. I mean, Donald Trump was here in London last week. King Charles mentioned AUKUS in the address to the royal banquet.
Just explain to us how that happens, right? That's no accident that the King suddenly mentions AUKUS when Donald Trump's sitting before
The King's speeches are done in consultation with the heads of government, right?
Which tells us what, David? That the British government
There's a
need to do this.
And really, who else can deploy power like the head of the British royal family?
And we know Trump likes the royals. But does that tell us that there should be confidence, or that there's a little uncertainty?
Well, I do. You never hear Donald Trump say, yes, I hear what you're saying about AUKUS and I'm behind it. So I think that's what you would like to see in the Washington trip.
And maybe a Rose Garden press conference where he says that from a podium and really just, beds it in.
It'll be a live-streamed Oval Office,
Keir Starmer said something else yesterday which I found interesting. He was talking to this sort of lefty loving in a way.
Lefty loving?
Well, it was, progressive parties all gathered in one place, and he was saying, look, you may not like what Donald Trump is doing on tariffs, but deal with it. That's the way it's going to be. And I think that's an interesting point to make ahead of Anthony Albanese's meeting, because I don't think that renegotiating tariffs is a realistic thing to expect out of that.
You want to talk about the pharmaceutical tariff rise that Trump announced yesterday, whenever
we've got 10% tariffs, and that's probably
100% on pharmaceuticals. So
just on the lefty love-in, as Crowe calls it, the meeting of these progressive leaders, which was really interesting gathering. What are we to read into this, Anna? Canada, Australia, the UK, who else was there? A few others as well.
Spaniards, Finnish,
Iceland.
What's this? What are they trying to do?
Yeah, they're grouping together. They're sending a joint message. They're saying we are on the same page. We're talking to each other. We're working on diplomacy in tandem, and we're going to make decisions together to try and apply pressure where we think it's needed, whether it's on Palestinian statehood, whether it's on climate change and the push to renewable energy. When you've got these big personalities and potentially chaos agents like Donald Trump in the mix, you've got to work out how do we apply ourselves to try and have a counterpoint.
And there's a particular figure here in the UK too that's very much putting pressure on the Labor government here.
Yeah, Nigel Farage, the head of Reform UK, who's way ahead in the polls and causing real consternation in the Labor ranks here.
And why is he way ahead? Migration, is it?
Migration is a big issue because you've got thousands of people crossing the English Channel in inflatable boats, and there is not a robust way to deal with that at the moment. They're taken to a port in Dover, they're put on buses and then put in asylum seeker hotels in the local community. And I've been to the protests. You talk to somebody there and they say, look, I'm not a far-right person. I just don't want an asylum seeker hotel in my community. I've lived here for 30 years. My children can't get affordable housing, and they're bringing in these people to take over the hotel. So there's a lot of
and the fact that the Reform Party
level
is ahead of Labor in the polls and way ahead of the Conservatives in the polls. Had this comment from Keir Starmer yesterday at that conference.
The choice before the electorate here at the next election is not going to be the traditional Labour versus Conservative. I want this to be out as an open fight now between Labour and Reform.
Now, is he serious about saying that Nigel Farage is his main opponent, or is this about stirring up the Conservatives?
No, I thought he in that same thing, Starmer said that centre-right parties in Europe are dead. Basically, they've withered on the vine, and this is the new Conservative that you face as a Labor movement. But the difference was I was watching that, and Albanese's sort of sitting there not saying much. He's on this panel with Mark Carney, the Canadian, and the Finnish, not Finnish, Icelandic. Yeah. Sorry, it's past midnight. Should have worn my pyjamas. The Icelandic PM. And the problems that Starmer was describing were largely a consequence of their woolly-headedness about not closing their borders. And you could sort of see Albanese. It's a shame the MC was so hopeless, because the question you would have asked is, what advice have you got for this bloke? It's not as accentuated in Australia, because we would have been in that spot had they not got tough on borders.
I tell you one years ago.
He said we shouldn't be squeamish.
Yeah, he did a mea culpa. He basically said we've been too squeamish in calling this out.
And look at what I just said about today's news, where he's
building 12 towns.
Building 12 towns, a lot of housing.
And he's bringing in a mandatory ID card. So, if the Parliament lets him, sorry, Dave, well, you have to. If you don't have one of these things, you cannot work. So it's that taking sugar off the table. So we've been through this at home.
Now, that ID card is going to be a huge debate for years, but what it's also done is it's presented Nigel Farage at Reform UK with something that Farage can't accept. So Starmer, whether it works or not, he's trying to wedge Nigel Farage. Digital ID, so that you've got to have a digital ID before you can get a job in the UK, and a legal migrant won't be able to get a job. And Farage is saying no to that. So there's a long way for this to go. It's 4 years till the next election.
One of the reasons why it's difficult for someone like Keir Starmer to take on Nigel Farage and other similar like-minded leaders facing right-wing populist opponents. I caught up with Alastair Campbell, former communications director to Tony Blair, now the co-host with Rory Stewart of the terrific Rest Is Politics podcast here in the UK. We spoke for our podcast this week, and he touched on the threat that Farage really poses to Labor.
This is where Farage apes Trump in so many ways. It's about feeling, it's about mood, it's about relationship. So I think Labour's in a big fight, but right across Europe, we're in a fight against the hard right. They've been planning this for a long time. And of course, because we rely so much, as you do, on the relationship with the United States, it's very hard to call it out when you're in government, because you need these guys on so many other, but the truth is, most British people think that Trump is a disaster for the world. If you're in the government, you can't really go out and say that.
So the difficulty is you attack these guys too hard, you're attacking Trump as well when you've got to work with Trump.
Hardly anybody mentioned Trump yesterday, all these leaders, but clearly they are waking up a bit too late to what's happening on the right and realising that the old messages from left-wing parties are not resonating, and they've got to adjust. The Icelandic PM said, what we've been doing is we've been talking at people, not with them. So they're trying to reconnect with this huge constituency that's drifting away.
I think it's a little bit more granular than just not being seen to be offending Trump. Albanese did this himself when we had those anti-immigration marches. Remember, he cautioned his caucus, not everyone there is a right-wing nut, right? Yeah, because there are people, as David pointed out, who have legitimate concerns and don't consider themselves, hard right or far right. Those concerns. So there's a sensitivity there. Yeah. The difference that we were saying before when we asked the PM yesterday, he basically played down the prospect of a far right, for want of a better term, hard right party taking hold in Australia to the extent it has here because, A, he said we control our borders, and B, as he told that seminar, this government has spent a lot of effort on increasing wages. They've had a wage rise in Britain for 15 years, and so people feel mugged by the system.
We do have some real wage growth. We still have, and Labor's kept in place the Operation Sovereign Borders measures of turning back.
But they're mindful of sort of trying to lift people who feel like they're falling through the cracks in the system.
There's another difference too. There's another difference, which is that your Trump and your Farage, they go out there, they freewheel, they talk, and people go, you're just talking from the heart, or you're just talking from your experience. And then you have these very cultivated political leaders on the centre-left who are coming out and have gone through party machines and have a very different approach, very disciplined and sometimes very repetitive. And they don't seem to be resonating in at least some countries, like here in the UK, with the population.
They're not grabbing the attention in the way that those others are.
Had this interesting line about predatory grievance, about the way in which the right wing taps into this sense of grievance in the community. And the grievance is real. And the big mystery in the UK is whether that's going to succeed for Farage over 4 years.
Tell you what, right now,
whether he needs to actually have a solution.
In Australia, it seems to be this is a bigger problem for the coalition and the fractures there rather than for Labor. Anyway, time to hear from the Prime Minister. We spoke after his audience with the King at Balmoral before flying back here to London. Prime Minister, welcome.
Good to be with you, David.
How was lunch with the King?
It was splendid. He is someone who is very interested in Australia, interested in the affairs of the world, and it's always a pleasure to talk with His Majesty. I've got to develop a relationship with him over recent years, and he was a very gracious host. I regarded it as a great personal honour to receive the invitation to Balmoral Castle, but an personal honour, but really an honour for Australia as well.
There is all sorts of protocols around what you can and can't say, but can you give us any insight into what you discussed?
We discussed a full range of issues. We discussed events in Australia, but also the context of the uncertainty that's there in the world.
Donald Trump?
Don't go into any of the specifics, but we discussed world affairs, his views. He's always interested in what's happening in Australia and what our views are of the Australian government. And we also had a rather wonderful lunch as well. So it was just a very good catch-up and a great honour to be there. Balmoral Castle is quite a special place.
The last Prime Minister who went there to Balmoral was Paul Keating back in '93, and during that visit he told the Queen that of his plans to have a referendum on a republic, to ditch the monarchy. I assume nothing like that came up today?
No, okay. And I think I've made it clear that I wanted to hold one referendum while I was Prime Minister, and we did that.
And that's it?
We did that.
So one referendum the entire time you're Prime Minister?
we did that. I think we're concentrating on cost of living and on making a real practical difference to people's lives.
Nonetheless, I mean, does it strike you as strange at all that you, as the Prime Minister of Australia, have come here, the other side of the world, we're in Scotland, to visit the King of Australia?
Of course, he is fully aware that I support an Australian as our head of state, but I also respect the decisions which have been made and our system of government. And I think that's important. If you look at the way that I conduct myself, I always support the institutions which are there. I think that's important as what role, Australia's Prime Minister.
What role does the monarchy play in today's Australia? What does it bring to us?
Well, I certainly think that Sam Mostyn is doing a fantastic job, Her Excellency, as Australia's Governor-General, as the representative in Australia, representing Australia to other countries in our region, but also around Australia as well. She's someone who is very active.
Sure, but what about the royal family?
Well, the royal family, I think, are given a great deal of respect. Their Majesties, when they visited Australia recently, King Charles and Queen Camilla were very well received. They work hard. They're interested in our place in the world. They're very interested in the Commonwealth, and CHOGM was held, of course, in the Pacific, in our region, last year, and I think they are respected.
So you're nearing the end of what's been a jam-packed week and a bit.
It's been pretty busy.
It's been busy. You had recognising Palestinian statehood, reviving a bid for Australia to win a seat on the UN Security Council. You've been meeting and drawing closer, I think, to the UK and Canada and France.
Investor roundtable
all of these
in
things.
New York.
I'm just wondering, are you trying to, do you see a greater or broader role for Australia on the international stage beyond the sort of regional focus that I think was dominant in your first term?
Australia punches above our weight. That's very clear to me when I have the honour of representing Australia in international forums. I think we primarily have to concentrate on our region in the Pacific with ASEAN. I think that is where our focus should be, but we have three pillars essentially to our international affairs: our alliance with the United States, our regional engagement, but the third as well is our support for multilateralism, of which we have a proud history. And part of that is that in today's world, the land war in Europe with the Russia invasion of Ukraine has made a difference to the price of goods on supermarket shelves in Australia because of energy crisis that arose in part out of that.
It all flows through.
And that's why we can't afford to be isolationists. That's why we have to be concerned about the state of the world.
I guess what I'm getting at is, given the uncertainty too around Trump's America, are you seeking to draw closer to like-minded countries, the UK and Canada in particular?
In itself, of course, the UK, historically, we have such an important relationship. Canada, under Prime Minister Carney, I've got to know him quite well in a short period of time. We have very similar economies, so I think we can learn off each other. Issues like critical minerals have been discussed in recent days with the UK and with Canada, as well as, of course, the defence and security relationship with the UK is very important indeed.
Do you find
and support for free and fair trade in the region as well. We're currently the chair of the CPTPP, and we will have the APEC summit in the next month.
Do you feel, though, that with these like-minded countries, you need to be standing up for the rule of law on behalf of middle powers, democracies who do believe in the rule of law?
Well, the United Nations address was a real opportunity for us to put Australia's philosophical position, if you like, about our place in the world and the way that we want the world to operate. And the rule of law is important, that there be guardrails. And the fact that the Russian invasion of Ukraine is perhaps a very acute example of where the international rule of law, if it's allowed to just occur, a more powerful nation attacking a sovereign nation in the way that that occurred, Australia has an interest in upholding international norms and rules.
You attended a conference in London yesterday of progressive leaders, and you've also expressed concern about the rise of populist organisations like Nigel Farage's Reform Party here in the UK. Why do you think Reform is so popular right now here?
Well, I think the world is very much turbulent at the moment, and it is the case that sometimes people look for easy answers, that their lot in life is difficult because of people who aren't like them. And the politics of grievance, of course, are always easy. It's easier to tear things down than it is to build them up. The job of social democrats is to build things, to create, to appeal to optimism and hope, which is a powerful force, but sometimes fear can be also a force that gets support.
Are some of these concerns, particularly on migration, are they legitimate?
Oh, look, people's concerns always have to be considered and respected. You've got to go to where people are and the way that they are thinking. You can't just dismiss that. You have to respond to that and indeed try to anticipate that in some ways. So I think that's important. That was part of the discussion yesterday, was very much philosophical, if you like, about the way that the world can move forward in a more united way.
Nigel Farage, you seemed to suggest yesterday you wouldn't be prepared to meet. Is that right? And is that the best approach to someone you disagree with?
Well, I met yesterday with the leader of the Labor Party and the leader of the opposition.
Of the Conservative Party?
Yeah, that's right.
But would you meet Nigel Farage?
Well, I haven't been invited to meet Nigel Farage, and, you know, I'm aware of his views. We would have very different views. Were he ever to be in a position, I respect people's positions and I engage with them. But I think yesterday I was pleased to meet Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the Conservative Party, and a range of her shadow ministers, her chief staff. We had a very constructive meeting.
What about the speech that Donald Trump gave to the United Nations? You were there, you were sitting in the audience listening along. It was a rather extraordinary speech, and he did talk a lot about migration as well. He suggested that uncontrolled migration is sending Western countries to hell. What do you think about the way he's approaching this issue? Does he also concern you?
Well, it's not my job to give a critique of other leaders. My job is to govern in Australia's national interest, and part of what we've done is to be strong on borders without being weak on humanity.
But if Nigel Farage concerns you, doesn't Donald Trump?
I do not. I don't do a running commentary on leaders of other nations. I respect the positions that they have. The truth is that around the world, people want, including in Australia, people want borders to be controlled. They want control over their migration system. That's a way that you build support for migration as well. It's why my government has been concerned about that. It's why we've continued Operation Sovereign Borders. It's why no one who has arrived by boat or attempted to arrive by boat since I've been Prime Minister has been permitted to stay in Australia.
You said just a moment ago that Australia does need to stand up for the rule of law. Again, with Donald Trump, what about the way the Justice Department in the United States is now being used to go after his political enemies? The former FBI Director James Comey, the latest example of this. And the President has said there will be others, were his words. Is there a point at which a line is crossed and countries like Australia need to speak up about this?
Well, what we don't need to do is to interfere in the domestic politics of another nation. What we need to do is to stand up for our own values in the way that we govern Australia. And we do that. We speak out about what our values are, and we govern Australia accordingly.
That means no criticism of this sort of behaviour?
What it means is that we respect the fact that elected governments are allowed to govern their own nations. And I'm not going to run a running commentary on US domestic politics, because my priority is governing Australia in the interests of Australians.
You'll meet Donald Trump in a few weeks. You've secured that meeting at the White House. I'm just wondering about how, Prime Minister, you'll approach this. Some leaders have gone in with a big offering or a gesture. Sir Keir Starmer had the letter of invitation from the King for a state visit. Qatar famously offered to donate a 747 jet. Do you feel like you need to make some sort of offering to Donald Trump?
No, I feel like I need to treat him with the respect that the President of the United States deserves. And I expect that to be returned. And certainly the indications are we've had 5 either phone conversations or greetings in person now, and they've all been warm, constructive, positive and optimistic. And I think it is in both Australia's interests and the interests of the United States that we continue to have a good relationship, and I'm sure that we will.
I guess Australia is offering access to critical minerals here. Can you explain what exactly is on the table here? Is it special access to the stockpile that you've promised to build, special access for the US over others like China?
Well, we'll have those negotiations with President Trump in person, with respect, David, rather than on insiders. But obviously,
these are Australia's resources.
Australia has everything that is in demand, almost the entire periodic table. And whether you're looking at lithium with the reserves that we have, or cobalt, or copper, or vanadium, we have great resources. We also have a capacity to value add as well. And we went to the election saying that we would have a critical minerals reserve, and that would be a way in which we ensured that markets couldn't be manipulated in the way that nickel, for example, has been manipulated, the market there, to alter prices and therefore to reinforce dominance, in that case, of China in that market. So,
and is the US being offered something others aren't being offered by Australia?
Well, we'll have those discussions with the United States.
And you also talked critical minerals with the British PM yesterday.
Absolutely.
As well. And you referenced some sort of defence, well, obviously they have a defence component to them. Could critical minerals become a third pillar of AUKUS here in some way?
What they could become certainly is a part of Pillar 2 by definition, because a range of the equipment, what's required for defence of all of our 3 nations, will be critical minerals will play a role in that.
Would that be your preference, to frame this as an AUKUS initiative to mine and process those critical minerals?
No, this is a bit different, but there's a connection obviously with defence, but there's also civil use as well of critical minerals and rare earths. We have an abundance, and one of the things that we want to do is to make sure that we don't just dig things up, our resources, export them, watch someone else value add, and then import them back at greater prices. What we have an opportunity to do, in part because of clean energy, because of the space that we have, is to have our resources dug up, yes, but value adding in Australia, a reserve that makes sure that we can play a role in international markets as well to stop manipulation, particularly by state enterprises. And that is something that we are very consciously doing, learning from some of the errors perhaps of the past. I mean, there's not a solar panel in the world that doesn't have intellectual property in it that was developed in Australia. We weren't good at commercialising the opportunities. So what we're talking about here is not giving anything to anyone, even our friends. What we are talking about is making sure that we maximise the return to Australia of that, but that we also make sure that we play a role in those international markets.
Final one, you're off to the UK Labor Party conference tomorrow where you'll be giving an address. Are you attending as Prime Minister, as Labor leader, or a little bit of both?
Well, I'm always, everyone is a part of their title. And Sir Keir Starmer, of course, invited me to come to the UK. And one of the things I'll be doing tomorrow as well is to meet further with John Healey and with other people in the administration as well. The UK relationship is really important. Every minister in the UK government will be in Liverpool tomorrow. I'll be there too, and I'll be meeting and engaging with them, helping to promote what we've done in the past week, which is to support the social media ban. Of course, we had an important event there, the investor meeting that we had in New York, the engagement we've had with the private sector here and in the United States as well, before we head to the UAE, where I'll be the next day, on Monday, talking as well there. The free trade agreement that we've established with the UAE opens up the Middle East market for Australia. Everything that we do in international forums is about helping domestically create jobs, boost our economy, strengthen it, and to make a difference to the people that we want to represent, the Australian people.
The trip's not done yet, but Prime Minister.
Not yet.
We thank you for joining us.
Been a busy time.
Prime Minister speaking to us a little earlier after that meeting with the King. Back to our panel, Phil Coorey, Anna Henderson, David Crowe. Anna, you were up there at Balmoral as well today. There does seem to be a genuine rapport, doesn't there, between, I mean, not that we get to go in and have a look, they're very strict about that.
The protocol says we can't know what's discussed, we don't know what they ate for lunch. It's all very much under wraps, isn't it?
The Republic question, though, yes, he's a Republican, but boy, he's made it very clear there, hasn't he? I did one referendum in my time as Prime Minister, and that's it. Not just this term.
Which is different to what he was. That's a policy change. He was saying until that interview that none this term of government. Now he's saying in my term of Prime Minister. Yeah. Unless he's just misspoke, but it's
well,
there goes any
pressed
chance.
him a couple of times. I mean, he seemed to make it pretty clear that that's it.
He was asked a question about the next term of Parliament yesterday at the doorstop or the day before.
And kept that open.
And he kept it open, so now it's closed.
But then today he was asked, in your lifetime, would you like to see Australia become a republic? And he didn't even directly sort of address that. He was still talking in kind of a vague sense about the importance of
the other
this
thing
stage
is,
of the monarch.
we should point out, sorry Anna, so much to say. There's so much time he spent today to go to Balmoral and come back.
Have lunch.
He's put a lot of time and effort.
Tell us about it. Tell us about it. It was a long trip.
Yeah, like
we're aware, Crowe.
It's about 12 hours.
It's been a long day.
For an hour and a half.
He's putting a lot of importance on that relationship with the King. And it doesn't look like he wants to sever ties with the King anytime soon.
I want to turn to Donald Trump's address at the UN. So this is going back a few days in New York, because there are a few moments, and this was one of them on climate change, that really stood out.
It's climate change. Because if it goes higher or lower, whatever the hell happens, this climate change, it's the greatest con job ever perpetrated on the world, in my opinion.
What did you make of the speech? And you guys were there as well. And I guess the reaction of all the leaders, including Anthony Albanese in the room, a lot of poker faces there, Phil.
Well, they all clapped in fear at the end. I think the thing that really stuck out of me that nearly, if I read it once, I read it 100 times in all the US press and foreign press, was that people contrasted that with Trump's first address to the UN when in his first term, and they said everyone sniggered, and then they said, but no one was laughing this time. I read that line 100 times, but no one laughed this time because the bloke's serious and he's doing this. So it goes back to what we were saying at the start of the program about why Australia and Canada and the rest are sort of circling wagons and trying to present an alternative narrative to that, because they considers climate change is real and needs to be addressed, and he clearly doesn't. So it was just putting really an exclamation point on, the isolationism and the whole sort of Trump thing.
I mean, the busted escalator and the teleprompter got a lot of the attention, but really on the substance, Anna, of what he is saying on climate change and migration, your countries are going to hell.
People were agape in the audience. I think there were leaders, and I was in the public gallery upstairs, so surrounded by both journalists and also sort of public officials for various governments, and they were just absolutely boggle-eyed as to what was going on, even though it is kind of a Trump stump speech. We've heard a lot of these lines before, but on that podium, directly to those other nations. And then the other issue is what happens with that rhetoric, because we can see how even in Australia that rhetoric sort of trickles down into the conversation. Some of that stuff around migration we're already seeing on the streets. This just emboldens some of those groups to
But on climate in particular, David, the following day, China then announces at the UN via video link with Xi Jinping, they're for the first time pledging to cut emissions. Now it's only 7 to 10% by 2035, and clearly everyone's saying, well, it needs to be more. But it's the first time they've promised to cut, and they're stepping into the void, the vacuum the US is creating here.
But there are some there's some fine print. They'll cut by 2035 from the peak. We don't quite know what the peak is and when it is, but sure, they're cutting. Now, a lot of leaders in that room would have been totally rejecting what Donald Trump was saying. However, leaders are also struggling on climate. And I found it really interesting watching from a distance the Australian debate on the 2035 target. The European Union could not agree on its 2035 target going into that UN meeting, so they didn't go with what's called the NDC, the actual commitment which Australia has.
And you look at the way both Chris Bowen and Anthony Albanese, the only thing they own is that target. They wouldn't own any of the mechanisms to get there, like the 50% of EV car sales, the 90% of renewable. They owned all those milestones for the 2030 target, but they're not government policy this time. They're advised. So there's clearly a sensitivity, and Trump has just gone hit that button, and everyone has been saying, "I told you so" on renewable energy.
And the leaders can sense that in the community there is this
skittishness.
Are we going too far, too fast? So they're holding back.
Palestinian recognition. I mean, it's been such a big week, but this was where it sort of started with the joint declarations from Australia, Canada, the US. At the UN, and then the following day a special summit convened by France and Saudi Arabia. Again, it's a point of difference with Donald Trump. I don't think he's been particularly aggressive in his denunciation of what these countries are doing. He's noted that he disagrees. But what, Anna, is this going to achieve? What's happened this week with this recognition by so many Western countries in particular?
There's very varied views about the answer to that question, both in the UN General Assembly discussion and in Australia as well, as to whether or not making this move, for some in Australia who've been pushing for this, some of the groups that are directly affected by this have been resettling people from Gaza who want Australia to change its policy and to say we're going to stand up for the people who want Palestinian statehood. They see this as a huge move to give gravity to that idea and to give that sense, as the Prime Minister said, of hope for a home. But on the other side, there's the question of, well, is there a home left to have? And also that this does feel to some of the kind of critical players in Australia that it's too late and it's too much symbolism.
Is there an argument, though, that this is perhaps putting some pressure on Trump? Because what we also saw over the last few days was he met with a bunch of Arab states and leading Muslim nations like Indonesia, clearly talking about trying to find a way through this. I think technically they were talking about what would follow any ceasefire.
Yeah, he's definitely thinking that multilateral meeting he had in New York with about 6 Arab states and the Indonesians was all about peacekeeping and stuff.
Ahead of meeting Netanyahu.
There's a ceasefire, and ahead of Netanyahu. We saw here in Britain, Tony Blair has reportedly been tapped to be some sort of administrator should the Gaza be, and Trump, Netanyahu's initial reaction to the declaration on Palestine was, I'll give a response when I get back to Israel from the UN, and Trump has reportedly told him, I don't want you annexing the West Bank. So there's
which is significant because for a long time there's been no red line, no pushback from Trump at everything Netanyahu's done, but
so there's a little
not just I don't want you doing it, I will stop you doing it. So it's been quite hard language there.
Yes, but his language can be hard, then a couple of days later it's soft, and we don't know exactly what kind of pressure he might bring to bear on Israel. And so when I look at the Palestinian statehood issue, you think, okay, well, some of the debate we've been hearing is Hamas cannot have any role in Gaza. Well, what's the mechanism to make that happen? That's not clear. And there's meant to be reform of the Palestinian Authority. Again, what's the mechanism to make that happen? So the next steps out of that debate from the UN this week are a mystery.
There's been a bit of politics, not a lot, but a bit of politics going on back home. And I want to cross to Mel Clarke in Canberra for a look at, well, the coalition, which spent much of the week focused not on the issues in New York or here in London, but on its own internal dramas. Mel, you've been following things there. It's been all about Andrew Hastie and what he's been up to with some social media posts that became, well, the centre of plenty of debate in the Liberal Party.
That's right. It would have been a week of real opportunity for the coalition to show that it can credibly respond to issues in politics, but instead it became a week pretty much entirely about Andrew Hastie and his social media posts. It started with a video of him next to a 1969 Ford Falcon talking about the lack of manufacturing. It prompted some of his colleagues to anonymously criticise that as being very much about Andrew Hastie and self-promotion and not being about the topics that the Liberal Party wants and needs to focus on at this time. That prompted him to respond with yet more social media posts, calling some of those anonymous critics as muppets. He then had another one with some text on some black and white images with a bit of suburban nostalgia with a riff about fertility rates and migration. And that really led to some private remarks that were quite caustic about Andrew Hastie's choice of words and topics to focus on at this point in time, given the Liberal Party still smarting from Jacinta Nampijinpa's comments about migration that really caused a backlash again in the migrant community against the Liberal Party. Now, Andrew Hastie has said that he's just being bold on the policy front, but he effectively had to end the week hosing down suggestions that he was trying to destabilise Susan Lee.
Look, I support Susan. Anyone who's speculating otherwise is being mischievous.
Mel, how did Susan Lee handle all of this?
Well, effectively, she didn't. She was quite neutered by this. Andrew Hastie was certainly driving the points of discussion amongst her colleagues, and ultimately we saw Susan Lee really retract later on in the week. There were some comments earlier in the week, but later in the week she was declining interview opportunities and relying on statements to really discuss the issues that should have been ones that the opposition could really make some headway on the government on. Things like the Optus OOO outage, the massive growth in illegal tobacco that's been problematic, even the climate targets the government announced last week. There were real opportunities for the coalition to show that they could credibly hold the government to account, but that ultimately wasn't how it played out. Now, that partly reflects on Andrew Hastie and his willingness and ability to help row the Liberal Party boat, but it also reflects on Susan Lee because she appeared to lack the appetite to seize the agenda back from Andrew Hastie.
Yeah, indeed. Mel Clarke, thank you very much for that. Look forward to catching up back in Canberra. And look, I guess this Andrew Hastie issue that Mel's talking about there, I mean, you touched on it earlier, I think, Phil, it kind of does overlap on the migration issues with what we were talking about earlier that's happening in so many Western democracies here in the UK, in the US and elsewhere. So it's fascinating to see on a smaller scale.
They're conflating a high migration rate with uncontrolled migration in the US and UK, and it's not the same thing, and that's why I think the threat to the centre-right parties in Australia, as you said, is probably the other way around.
Yeah, it's more a problem for Susan Lee.
Yeah.
Look, one other issue at the UN, Anna, that I wanted to touch on was this social media event that Australia hosted on the sidelines to try and generate some public attention, global attention, over its age limit, the ban on kids under 16 being on social media. We were at the event. It actually had a pretty strong turnout, some pretty strong comments from Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission President.
Yeah, the EU clearly backing this in. The leader of Greece as well, also giving his support to the idea of going further in that country. There is an appetite, it seems like a groundswell, particularly in Europe, to try and go further. And what we heard in terms of the first-person account of an Australian mother who lost...
This was Emma Mason, yeah, whose daughter Tilly took her own life after horrendous online bullying. She spoke so powerfully. Yeah. There was a standing ovation. It was an incredible address.
You could have heard a pin drop, and I think we talk a lot about the UN not really getting many places on a lot of fronts, and it seems like things are incremental. What's the value of it? There was value right there.
Which is what the social media giants are fearing, aren't they, Phil? That this is going to go global.
100%. Well, if only it would. But yeah, I think von der Leyen saying the Europeans are looking at what we're doing and want to do the same was significant. She's the head of the EU. I can't remember who it was. My head's so full of mud and sticks. But someone told me a good story. I think it was someone in the travelling party that one of the UN officials who went and watched that thing said, "That's the first thing I've ever seen at the UN that's changed my mind on anything."
That's interesting.
Emma's speech. So that's it was one of the sort of.
Denmark's doing trying to do a social media ban from age 15, right? I think Australia's 16, right? So countries will move in that direction, but you can just see we're getting back to the dynamic we talked about earlier in the program, which is what happens when the social media giants, the big tech, talks to Donald Trump and says, hang on, this is infringing on freedom of expression or something like that. And then you get into that same dynamic of the social democratic leaders at odds with Donald Trump. A long way to go on whether they can actually make that happen.
It's unclear how they're going to make it happen as well. It's an idea.
Sure, there's debate around all that, but it's about setting that standard for society and for parents as well. All right, our panel, Phil Coorey, Anna Henderson and David Crowe, back shortly with some final observations. Time now for Mike Bowers and Talking Pictures.
I'm Mike Bowers and I'm photographer at large for the New Daily. I'm talking pictures this morning with the former BBC correspondent for Washington and currently the host of Saturday Extra on ABC, Nick Bryant, and a very warm welcome.
Great to see you, Mike.
The Prime Minister travelled to the UN, but there was one specific person he really wanted to see.
Well, they always say Leaders' Week at the United Nations is like diplomatic speed dating. And Anthony Albanese really did get a speed date, didn't he? It didn't last that long, but he was very quick with the selfie.
Here is the said selfie, which kind of looks like a Travago ad. He's got a very large set of white teeth.
When I saw that first, Mike, I thought that was AI. It is a slightly odd picture of Donald Trump, isn't it?
It's really a case of no photo didn't happen. So it's like, I needed photographic evidence.
You needed the proof. They're going to have this meeting later on at the White House in October, aren't they? But that is the smile of relief. I finally got to meet him.
The President of the US gave an hour-long speech.
I mean, he was sort of careering all over the road. It felt like a little bit like a demolition derby, calling global warming a con job, really attacking the institution, obviously moaning about the escalator.
I thought this was top shelf from Kathy Wilcox. She's picked up on the car crash, UN, climate, democracy, Gaza, and the beast is looking fairly bent up there. Maybe it's time they took his keys away.
Yeah, presidents are never allowed to drive, actually. The Secret Service never allowed them to drive.
Mark Knight has drawn the beast going through Times Square here with the Prime Minister in his pro-Palestine. All I need now is for the President to recognise me. David Rowe, who's in a permanent purple patch cartooning. I don't think that the President would be too pleased with his depiction here as the wind vane.
David Rowe is the gold standard, right? I mean, he's just amazing.
We've got Chris Bowen and the Prime Minister here, so a White House meeting.
Let's see which way the wind blows.
Yeah.
But it shows Trump just switches sides continually, often depending on who he last spoke to.
I guess it keeps allies and enemies on their toes.
It certainly does that.
Dean Alston from the West Australian has picked up on it. All I get from the UN is a bad escalator, a bad teleprompter and bad security. Who the hell is this guy?
Yeah, Trump's really being... So he sees this conspiracy theory at the United Nations. You know, the escalator didn't work, the teleprompter didn't work.
All his own staff.
He's called it a triple sabotage. And the UN is saying, actually, it was the Americans. The Americans were in control of the teleprompter, and it was an American that actually tripped the safety mechanism on the escalator as well.
His videographer, I'm told.
His videographer, yeah.
Australia joined Canada and France and Britain in recognising a Palestinian state, but the state of Gaza continues to deteriorate. And this is a very clever cartoon from David Pope, who picked up on the fact that POTUS and OPTUS is just really one letter change.
Yeah, it took me a while to work this one out, Mike, to be honest. But when I did, I thought, that is brilliant. And this idea of, the Palestinian people in Gaza trying to call the international community.
And
nothing there.
Through.
Nothing there.
Yep.
I thought that was genius.
Yep. Well done, Mr. Pope. Peter Brollman, great news. Australia recognised the state of Palestine.
Yeah, there isn't much of a state left to recognise. It's rubble-strewn in Gaza. In the West Bank, there are Israeli settlements all over the place which are encroaching on the Palestinian land. A lot of people are saying this kind of recognition for Palestine needed to happen now, given the level of destruction that we've seen in Gaza.
Yeah. Nick, this week we learnt that if you feel like taking medical advice from Trump and the administration, you should lie down until you're feeling better.
Yeah, right. This was the moment when Robert Kennedy appeared alongside Donald Trump. They were trying to say there's a link between Tylenol and autism, which has been debunked by most scientists. Donald Trump said this week at the United Nations, I'm right about everything. I think a lot of doctors and scientists around the world would disagree with that.
Yeah. Matt Golding, he's got them making the announcement here, RFK Jr. and Trump, and when they turn around, they're in surgical gowns, which is, this is a vision that's just not going to leave me.
It's hard to sort of expunge from your mind, isn't it?
And finally, Matt Bissett-Johnson, who's got the classic tombstone here, listen to Donald Trump's medical advice, which I think is very clever.
That is clever.
Nick, thank you very much for taking the time. I'll let you do the honours.
David, back to you.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Mike. Let's get some final observations. Phil.
5-6 years ago, Scott Morrison came to the US and they went down to Ohio to open the Pratt's new box factory down there, and with Trump, and it turned into a MAGA rally. And Anthony Albanese, then opposition leader, rightfully sort of chastised the then Prime Minister for being overseas and participating in a partisan event. In about 6 hours' time, we're off to Liverpool for the British Labor Party conference, and guess who the guest speaker is? Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. And having one meeting yesterday with Kemi Badenoch, the Conservative leader in Britain, I think is not fig leaf enough. It's a hypocritical act.
Very good. Anna.
Zomi Frankham was an Australian aid worker. She was killed in an Israeli drone strike, and during the UN week that the Prime Minister held, Penny Wong, the Foreign Minister, had an event where they launched their declaration for the protection of humanitarian workers. Half of the UN countries have signed on. It's like a groundswell of support for the protection of humanitarian workers. 2024 was one of the deadliest years. I think it was the deadliest year for those who choose to work in this sector. And Zomi's brother, Mal Frankham, was invited to be in the audience for the Prime Minister's delivery of his United Nations address, and it was a very meaningful moment to sort of see how her death has led to some action.
And that event too was very well attended by a lot of diplomats there at the UN too. All right, David.
We've been talking about the hard right, the far right tonight. We're in the studios of the BBC, and I was talking about Nigel Farage with a legendary BBC political analyst, Sir John Curtis, who usually does the election night calls and so forth. And I said, what is it about Nigel Farage that enables him to be so successful? And he says, there's something about him that's like Donald Trump. They both speak human. And when we listen to a lot of politicians talking, we often hear them talk jargon. And I think what he's saying is a really good point about politics today. Whether they're right or left is one thing, but whether they can speak human can really set them apart. And I think that's some of the dynamic that we're seeing now.
It's about the communication as well as the substance.
Yeah.
Look, terrific to have you all here. Thank you for staying up till, what time is it? It's almost 1 a.m. Here in London. It's time for breakfast. Thank you all very much for that. And a big thanks to the BBC and all involved in making this show happen from London. It has been a lot of fun. Finally, a shout out to the camera crews on the PM's trip. Taking a snap of two Prime Ministers shaking hands might look straightforward, but check out the hustle required to get from the shot outside Downing Street, the entrance there, to the shot of the two leaders sitting down inside. We'll leave you with that. Thanks for watching.
Making us all feel very excited about being here.